My brother's text arrived at 3:47 in the afternoon. Skip New Year's. You are an embarrassment. My fiancé cannot know your situation. The problem was, that situation was chairing a boardroom meeting worth hundreds of millions. The irony. His bride-to-be just walked in as the opposing lawyer. She froze the second she saw me. But the real knife twist was not her realization. It was what I had prepared long before they decided to be ashamed of me. My name is Riley Bailey, and at 3:47 in the afternoon on December 28th, I was arguably the most powerful person in the city of Seattle. I was sitting at the head of a mahogany table that cost more than my brother's car, staring down the barrel of a fourth-quarter financial report that was nothing short of miraculous. The air in the room was recycled, cool, and smelled faintly of expensive coffee and aggressive ambition. Across from me, Victor Shaw, my chief financial officer, was sweating. He always sweated when the numbers were this good, as if he expected the universe to correct itself violently at any moment. We are looking at a 22% year-over-year growth in the cloud infrastructure division, Victor said, his laser pointer trembling slightly against the projection screen. If we close the Coastline acquisition by the second week of January, our valuation post-merger is going to hit the ceiling. We are talking about a market cap that puts us in the Fortune 500 conversation. Riley, I did not smile. Smiling in meetings like this was a sign of relief, and I did not want them to think I was relieved. I wanted them to know I expected this. I tapped my pen against the leather notebook in front of me. The Coastline deal is not an if, Victor, I said, my voice low. It is a when. We have the leverage. Their logistics software is bleeding cash, and their board knows we are the only ones with the algorithms to fix it. Keep the pressure on the earn-out clauses. I want their legacy systems gone by Q2 of next year. Victor nodded rapidly. Understood. I will tell the team. That was when my phone vibrated against the table. It was a single, short buzz. In a room this quiet, it sounded like a gunshot. I usually kept my personal device in my bag during board-level strategy sessions, but today was different. It was the holiday season. The city was winding down. I had left it face down next to my water glass. I flipped it over. The screen lit up with a notification from Dylan, my older brother, the golden boy, the man whose approval had been the currency my family traded in since I was 6 years old. The preview message was long, but the first sentence was enough to make the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. Don't come to New Year's. Serious request. I kept my face perfectly neutral. I looked up at Victor, who was now talking about projected tax liabilities for the upcoming fiscal year. I nodded at him to continue, then looked back down and unlocked the phone. The full message was worse. It was not just a request. It was an eviction notice from my own bloodline. Don't come to New Year's. Serious request. Sloan and I talked about the guest list. Look, I love you, but your life is an embarrassment right now. You're bouncing between jobs. You're single. You're a mess. Sloan's family is going to be there. Her dad is a senior partner at a major firm. I can't have you sitting there answering questions about whatever temp gig you're doing this month. Sloan doesn't know about your situation, and I want to keep it that way. Stay home. It's better for everyone. My thumb hovered over the screen. My situation. I looked around the room. I looked at the floor-to-ceiling glass walls that offered a panoramic view of the gray, rain-slicked skyline. I looked at the logo of Strataforge Systems etched into the frosted glass of the door, a company I had built from a laptop and a stack of maxed-out credit cards into a logistics empire that was currently reshaping the entire North American supply chain. Dylan thought I was a temp. He thought this because I never told him otherwise. 7 years ago, when my first startup imploded and I lost my apartment, Dylan had told me I was destined for mediocrity. My parents had sighed and agreed. So when I clawed my way back, when I built Strataforge, I kept it to myself. I let them believe what they wanted to believe. I let them think I was struggling, because their pity was quieter than their judgment. But this was new. The phone buzzed again, then again. A flurry of vibrations rattled the table. The family group chat, titled Mercer Family Connect, had come alive. Dylan must have primed them. Mom Riley, honey, please listen to your brother. This is a big night for him. Sloan comes from a very prominent family. We just want things to go smoothly. Dad. It is about presentation. Riley, you know how you get. You are awkward socially. You do not have the wardrobe for a black tie event, and we cannot afford to cover you this time. Just sit this one out, Brooke. Seriously. Don't be selfish. Dylan is finally settling down with someone high caliber. Don't ruin the aesthetic. Just stay in your apartment and order pizza or whatever you do. I felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. It was not sadness. Sadness was a luxury I had abandoned years ago. This was clarity. It was the absolute, crystalline realization that to these people, I was not a person. I was a stain on the family portrait that they were desperately trying to Photoshop out. Victor stopped talking. The silence in the room grew heavy. Riley? He asked, his voice tentative. Is everything all right? We can pause if you need to take that. I locked the phone and placed it face down again. The metal casing made a sharp click against the wood. No, I said. My voice was steady, devoid of any tremor. Proceed. Victor, you were discussing the liability cap, but before Victor could resume, there was a sharp rap on the glass door. We both turned. Calvin Reed, my executive assistant, was standing there. Calvin was 24, brilliant, and possessed the kind of organizational sociopathy that made him invaluable. He never interrupted a Q4 review unless the building was on fire. I waved him in. Calvin opened the door, clutching a tablet to his chest. He looked apologetic and urgent. I am sorry to interrupt, Calvin said, stepping into the room. Victor? Hello? Riley. I have an update from the other side. The Coastline Board just contacted us. I frowned. They want to renegotiate the price. No, Calvin said. They want to reschedule the integration strategy meeting. Their legal counsel insisted on being present for the final vetting of the intellectual property clauses. They cannot make it until after the holiday. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking softly. When, January 2nd, Calvin said, 9 a.m, here. That is fine, I said. It gives Victor more time to finalize the audit. Who are they bringing? Did they send the roster? Yes, Calvin said. He tapped his tablet and swiped the file onto the main screen at the front of the room. They have retained outside counsel for the closing, a specialized M&A firm. I looked up at the screen. The document was a standard legal roster, listing the attorneys who would be representing Coastline Freight Logic in the acquisition. At the top, in bold letters, Barton, Gray Finch, LLP. I knew the firm. They were sharks, expensive, aggressive, and highly competent. They were exactly who I would have hired if I were in Coastline's shoes and trying to salvage a dying company. Standard power play, Victor muttered, looking at the list. They are bringing a senior partner. Look at the second chair, Calvin said. There was a weird note in his voice. He knew my family history. He knew the names I never spoke aloud. I narrowed my eyes, scanning down the list. Lead counsel Arthur Finch, senior partner, and right below him, second chair Sloan Harrington, senior associate. The world stopped spinning for exactly 1 second. I stared at the name, Sloan Harrington, my brother's fiancée, the woman who was too good to know about my situation, the woman whose family was so prominent that my presence at a New Year's party would constitute a social disaster. She was not just a lawyer. She was the lawyer coming to my boardroom to negotiate the surrender of a company I was buying for $350 million. She was coming here. To Strata Forge, to the 52nd floor. I looked at the phone sitting face down on the table. The messages were still there, invisible but heavy as lead. Your life is an embarrassment. Sloan doesn't know. A laugh bubbled up in my throat, a dark, jagged thing that I swallowed before it could reach my lips. Dylan was right. Sloan didn't know. She had no idea that the awkward, unemployed sister she had likely heard horror stories about was the shark waiting in the deep water. Riley? Calvin asked. He was watching me closely. Do you want me to flag a conflict of interest? We can ask them to switch her out. No, I said instantly. The word came out sharper than I intended. I softened it, smoothing my expression into a mask of professional indifference. No. Calvin, do not flag anything. Victor looked confused. Do you know her? I picked up my pen again. I felt a surge of energy, electric and terrifying, coursing through my veins. It was the adrenaline of the hunt. I know of her, I said. She is competent. Let her come. I reached for my phone. I unlocked it one last time. I opened the group chat. My mother, my father, my sister, and my brother. They were all waiting for my capitulation. They expected a fight, or tears, or a beg for inclusion. They expected the Riley they had created in their heads. I typed 2 words. Understood. Enjoy. I hit send. Then I put the phone away and looked up at my team. Victor, I said, my voice commanding the room. I want the diligence report on Sloane Harrington's previous 3 cases on my desk by tonight. I want to know her win rate, her negotiation style, and exactly where she breaks under pressure. If she is coming to my table, I want to know exactly what she is serving. Consider it done, Victor said, though he looked slightly terrified by the intensity in my eyes. Calvin, I continued, confirm the meeting for January 2nd. Ensure the boardroom is prepped. I want the full intimidation package, the smart glass, the catered breakfast, the NDA protocols strictly enforced at the door. Got it, Calvin said. I stood up and walked to the window. The city of Seattle lay spread out below me, a grid of lights fighting against the winter gray. Somewhere out there, my brother was probably laughing with his fiancée, clinking glasses, relieved that he had successfully pruned the dead weight from his perfect life. He thought he had won. He thought he had erased me. He had no idea. I looked at my reflection in the glass. I didn't look like an embarrassment. I looked like a predator who had just smelled blood in the water. You want me to disappear from the party. Dylan. You want to hide your shameful sister from your high-powered life. Fine. I will not come to your party. I will not eat your appetizers or ruin your aesthetic. I will wait. I will wait until January 2nd. I will wait until the doors of this boardroom slide shut and there is nowhere left to run. You want me to disappear, but I am going to show up in the one place where you cannot hide. To understand why I did not throw my phone through the 52nd floor window of the Strataforge building, you have to understand the specific ecosystem of the Mercer family. In any biological system, organisms play specific roles to maintain balance. In my family, the roles were assigned before any of us could even speak, and any deviation from the script was treated like a cancerous mutation. Dylan was the son. This was not a metaphor. It was the gravitational reality of our household. From the moment he could walk, he was an event. He was the varsity quarterback who also captained the debate team. He was the boy who brought home report cards that looked like they had been printed in a factory of perfection. He had that easy, golden boy charm that made teachers forgive his forgotten homework and made girls cry in the hallways. When Dylan entered a room, the oxygen seemed to gather around him, eager to be breathed by someone so promising. Then there was Brooke. If Dylan was the sun, Brooke was the perfectly manicured garden that bloomed in his light. She was the socialite, the connector, the one who knew exactly what to say to the neighbors and exactly which fork to use at a formal dinner. She was homecoming queen, sorority president, the kind of person who turned networking into an art form. My parents looked at her and saw a flawless extension of their own social aspirations. And then there was me. I was the glitch. I was the kid who spent recess taking apart the classroom radio to see how the transistors worked. I did not play sports. I did not care about prom. While Brooke was agonizing over corsages and Dylan was being scouted by universities, I was in the basement, smelling like solder and ozone, building a motherboard from scrap parts. I had scavenged from the local dump. My parents did not know what to do with me. They were not cruel in the way you see in movies. They did not lock me in a cupboard. It was more subtle than that. It was a pervasive, gentle disappointment. They introduced Dylan as our star athlete and Brooke as our social butterfly. When they got to me, there was always a pause, a slight clearing of the throat, before they would say, "And this is Riley. She is very internal. They labeled me early. I was antisocial. I was difficult. I was awkward. When I scored in the 99th percentile on my standardized tests, there was no celebration dinner. My father just looked at the paper, frowned, and asked why I could not apply that same focus to making friends. My achievements were treated as accidents, statistical anomalies that did not fit the data set they had already compiled on my life. To them, my intelligence was a party trick that did not make up for my lack of social grace, but the real damage, the thing that truly calcified my heart against them, happened 7 years ago. I was 29. I had just launched my first startup, a cloud-based inventory management system called LogiTrack. I had poured my entire savings into it. I had worked 20-hour days for 18 months. I believed in it with the naive ferocity of youth, and it failed. It failed spectacularly. The market collapsed. My co-founder embezzled our operating capital, and I was left with $6 in my bank account and an eviction notice. I had to move back into my parents' basement for 3 months. It was the lowest point of my life. I was humiliated, broken, and terrifyingly vulnerable. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a bowl of cereal, waiting for my mother to hug me, to tell me that failure was part of the process, that I was smart, and I would bounce back. Instead, she sighed. It was a long, heavy sound that seemed to suck the air out of the kitchen. "We were afraid of this, Riley," she said, placing a hand on my shoulder. It felt heavy, like a sentence being passed. "You just are not built for the big leagues. You are too fragile. Maybe you should look for something steady, like data entry, something where you do not have to talk to people or take risks." Dylan was there too. He was visiting from his uptown condo. He leaned against the counter, drinking a protein shake, and shook his head. "She is right, Ree. You have to stop chasing these pipe dreams. It is embarrassing. You are almost 30. It is time to accept who you are." That was the moment. I looked at them, my mother with her pity, my brother with his arrogance, and I realized the truth. They were not sad that I had failed. They were relieved. My failure comforted them. It validated their worldview. If I succeeded, if I became powerful or wealthy, it would disrupt the hierarchy. It would mean they had been wrong about me for 30 years. But my failure fit. It kept Dylan as the star. It kept Brooke as the success. It kept Riley as the cautionary tale, the broken thing that needed their benevolent pity. They loved the story of my incompetence more than they loved me. I moved out the next week. I took a job at a generic IT consulting firm, fixing servers and troubleshooting printer jams for mid-sized law firms. It was boring, invisible work, and to my family, it was perfect. When I told them about the job, they beamed. "Finally, my father said. "Something sensible. Good for you. Riley, keep your head down." So I did. I kept my head down. But while my head was down, my hands were working. I lived in a studio apartment that smelled permanently of damp drywall. I ate instant noodles and drank coffee that tasted like battery acid. I wore the same 3 outfits on rotation. I let my family believe I was barely scraping by. I let them buy me groceries when they visited, enduring their lectures on budgeting with a silent nod. But every night, from 8 in the evening until 4 in the morning, I was building Strataforge. I wrote the core algorithm on a laptop that was missing the E key. I designed the predictive logistics engine that would eventually revolutionize coastal shipping while sitting on a mattress on the floor, because I could not afford a chair. I did not sleep. I did not socialize. I channeled every ounce of my rage, every memory of their dismissal, into lines of code. When I landed my first major client, a regional shipping conglomerate that was losing $4 million a year in routing inefficiencies, I did not call my parents. I celebrated with a single glass of cheap whiskey and went back to work. When I secured my first round of venture capital funding, a wire transfer of $2.5 million that hit my account on a rainy Tuesday, I did not call Dylan. I stared at the balance on my screen, feeling a cold, hard satisfaction that was better than any praise. When Strataforge grew too big for my apartment and I leased a 10,000 square foot office space in the financial district, I did not invite Brooke to the opening. I told the family I was picking up extra shifts at the IT firm. Why? Because I had learned the most important lesson of my life. When people have decided who you are, they will punish you for proving them wrong. If I had told them about my success in the early days, they would have found a way to poison it. They would have called it luck. They would have warned me I was going to lose it all again. Dylan would have tried to offer business advice despite never having run a company in his life. My mother would have told me not to get my hopes up. They would have trampled the sprout before it could become a tree. So I built a wall of silence. I let them have their narrative. I let them tell their friends at the country club that poor Riley was getting by and doing her best in IT support. I let them feel superior. I let them buy me charity gifts at Christmas gift cards for grocery stores, sensible socks while I was signing checks for 6 figures. It became a game, a dark, private game of chess, where I was the only one who knew the pieces were moving. I remember one dinner, about 2 years ago. Strataforge had just been valued at $50 million. I was exhausted, running on adrenaline and caffeine, but I went to my parents' house for a Sunday roast. Dylan was there, talking loudly about a promotion he had received. He was now a regional manager for a pharmaceutical sales company. A good job, a respectable job. He was bragging about his bonus, about the new lease on his Audi. "It is all about the hustle, Riley," he said, pointing a fork at me. "You have to be hungry. You cannot just sit in a cubicle and wait for life to happen. Maybe I can send you some books on motivation. Might help you get out of that rut." I looked at him. I looked at his mid-range suit. I looked at the watch on his wrist that cost less than the office chair I sat in every day. "Thanks, Dylan," I said, cutting my potatoes. "I will look into it." "She is doing fine, Dylan," my mother said, patting my hand condescendingly. "Not everyone is ambitious like you. The world needs worker bees too. Right, Riley?" "Right, Mom," I said. "Worker bees." I went home that night and authorized the acquisition of a competitor for $12 million. The silence was not just protection anymore, it was power. Every time they underestimated me, I added another 0 to my net worth. Every time they called me awkward or slow. I refined the user interface of my software until it was sharper than a scalpel. They thought I was drowning in the deep end of the pool, struggling to keep my head above water. They had no idea that I wasn't drowning. I was the one building the ocean, and now, with the coastline deal on the table, with the valuation of my company about to skyrocket into the stratosphere, the gap between their version of Riley and the reality of Riley had become a canyon. I had spent 6 years in the dark, tempering myself like steel. I had traded warmth for strength. I had traded their approval for my own sovereignty. So when Dylan texted me that my life was an embarrassment, he was speaking to a ghost. He was speaking to the version of me that died in that basement 7 years ago. He was insulting a woman who no longer existed. The woman who existed now did not need his approval. She did not need his invitation to a New Year's party. She did not need a seat at his table. She owned the table. And the tragedy, the absolute, hilarious tragedy of it all, was that he was about to walk into the boardroom of the embarrassment he had pitied for a decade, and he was going to realize that while he had been playing checkers with his social status, I had been buying the board. I sat in my office, the city lights beginning to flicker on below me as the winter sun set. I thought about the ramen noodles, the sleepless nights, the damp walls of that first apartment. I thought about the silence I had swallowed for years. It was time to break the silence. But not with a shout, not with a tantrum. I was going to break it with a signature on a contract that would make headlines across the entire business world. I was going to let the weight of my reality crush their fiction. They wanted the worker bee fine. They were about to find out what happens when the worker bee owns the hive. The silence in my apartment on New Year's Eve was expensive. It was the kind of silence you could only buy with a corner unit on the 45th floor. Triple-paned glass, and a security system that kept the chaos of the city exactly where it belonged down below. I was not wearing a party dress. I was wearing oversized cashmere sweatpants and a t-shirt from a tech conference I had attended in 2019. On the kitchen island, a container of takeout pad thai sat open, steam curling lazily into the air. Next to it stood a bottle of Chateau Margaux, a vintage that retailed for more than my father's first car. It had been a gift from a Japanese supply chain partner after we optimized their trans-Pacific shipping routes. I poured a glass. The wine was a deep, rich crimson, almost black in the dim lighting of the apartment. Outside my floor-to-ceiling windows, Seattle was preparing to explode. The Space Needle was lit up, a glowing beacon in the dark, waiting for the midnight countdown. Down on the streets, I knew people were shivering in sequined dresses and thin tuxedos, desperate to feel part of something, desperate to be seen. I took a sip of the wine. It tasted like velvet and old money. My phone, resting on the marble counter, lit up. It had been lighting up for hours. I walked over to it, not with dread, but with the detached curiosity of a pathologist examining a tissue sample. I swiped open the Mercer Family Connect group chat. It was a gallery of performative happiness. There was a photo of Brooke, my sister, wearing a silver dress that looked like it cost a month's rent. She was posing with a glass of champagne, her arm linked with a man I vaguely recognized as a local councilman. The caption read, "VIP section is insane. Just saw the mayor. What a night." There was a photo of my parents. My mother was wearing her special occasion pearls, the ones she usually saved for weddings and funerals. My father was in a rented tuxedo that was slightly too tight across the shoulders. They were standing in a ballroom that dripped with crystal chandeliers. They looked terrified and ecstatic at the same time. They looked like people who had finally been allowed into the castle and were terrified of touching anything. And then, there were the photos of Dylan and Sloane. There were dozens of them. Dylan in a sharp black suit, his hair perfectly gelled, that winning smile plastered across his face, the smile that had gotten him out of speeding tickets and into sales jobs he was not qualified for. Sloane was next to him, looking undeniably elegant in emerald green. She looked poised. She looked like she belonged there. Mom. So proud of you two. What a stunning couple. Everyone is asking about the wedding, Dad. Make sure you introduce us to Mr. Harrington when he arrives. We want to thank him for the invite. Brooke, seriously, this is the event of the year. Dylan, you are crushing it. I scrolled through the praise. It was a feedback loop of validation. They were feeding off each other, constructing a reality where the Mercer family was elite, successful, and flawless. Then, a private notification slid down from the top of the screen. It was from Dylan. I opened it. Thanks for understanding about tonight. It is just easier for me this way. Happy New Year. I stared at the words. Easier for me. I took another bite of my noodles, chewing slowly. He was right. It was easier. It was easier to play the successful businessman when the sister who supposedly failed at life was not there to ask difficult questions. It was easier to charm his future father-in-law when he did not have to explain why his sister was wearing a department store dress because he assumed she could not afford anything else. He was thanking me for being invisible. He was thanking me for staying in the box he had built for me. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard. I could have typed 1,000 things. I could have typed, "I am currently drinking wine that costs more than your suit." I could have typed, "I am not coming because I am busy buying the company your fiancé works for." But I didn't. Power does not need to shout. I typed, "Have fun." I hit send. Then I set the phone to "Do Not Disturb" and pushed it away. Easier for you, I whispered to the empty room. Because you get to tell the story you want. You get to be the hero for one more night. I picked up my wine glass and walked over to the dining table, where my laptop was waiting. The screen was already glowing, a single window open. It was the due diligence file for Coastline Freight Logic. I sat down. The festive noise of the city was just a hum in the background. My real party was here, in the data. I scrolled down to the legal team's roster again. I expanded the section on Sloane Harrington. I had asked Victor for a deep dive, but I wanted to see the primary source material myself. Sloane was listed as the lead on risk assessment and intellectual property. I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile. She was going to be the one responsible for vetting Strataforge. She was the one who was supposed to look at my company and tell her client if it was a safe bet. She had been assigned to investigate me, and she didn't even know who me was. I looked at the timestamps on the shared data room logs. Sloane had accessed the files 3 times in the last 24 hours. She was working over the holiday too. She was diligent. I respected that. She was preparing to walk into that boardroom on January 2nd and tear the opposing CEO apart. She probably had a list of aggressive questions prepared. She probably had a strategy to drive the price down. She was preparing for a battle of wits. She had no idea she was walking into an execution. I closed the file and stood up. I felt a restless energy in my legs. I walked to my bedroom, to the walk-in closet that was larger than the bedroom I had grown up in. I flipped the switch, and the recessed lighting illuminated the rows of suits. I did not wear off-the-rack anymore. I wore custom tailoring from a small house in London that flew a cutter to Seattle twice a year to measure me. I ran my hand along the fabrics: navy wool, charcoal gray, pinstripe. I stopped at a suit I had commissioned 2 months ago. It was a deep, midnight blue, so dark it looked black in the dim light. The cut was severe, architectural. It was a suit that did not ask for permission. It was a suit that commanded silence. I pulled it out and hung it on the valet stand. Next to it, I placed a white silk blouse, high collar, no cleavage, professional, clinical. I opened the watch drawer. My collection was modest but significant. I bypassed the Cartier tank, too soft. I bypassed the Apple Watch, too tech bro. I reached for the vintage Omega Speedmaster. It was a man's watch. Technically, it was heavy, mechanical, and timeless. It was the kind of watch worn by people who landed on the moon. It was a watch for pioneers, not passengers. I placed it next to the suit. This was my costume. This was the armor I would wear when I walked into the room. I was not doing this to show off. If I wanted to show off, I would have driven my Porsche to their party and crashed the gates. I would have flashed my bank account balance on the projector, but that was petty. That was the reaction of a wounded child. This was different. I chose these things to remind myself, when I put on that suit on January 2nd, I would not be Riley the screw-up. I would not be Riley the antisocial little sister. I would be Riley Bailey, the architect of a billion-dollar logistics network. I would be the woman who stayed up until 4 a.m. writing code while Dylan was sleeping off hangovers. I would be the woman who ate rice and beans for 3 years so she could afford server space. I was dressing for the person I had become, not the person they remembered. My laptop pinged with a new email. It was Calvin. Of course it was Calvin. He did not believe in holidays either. Subject draft press release. For review. Riley. Attached is the draft for the acquisition announcement. Per your instructions. We have the embargo set to lift 48 hours after the signing concludes. This will go to the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, and TechCrunch simultaneously. If the deal signs on the 2nd, the world knows by the morning of the 4th. Let me know if you want any changes to the quote in the 3rd paragraph. Calvin. I read the email twice. 48 hours. That was the timeline. On January 2nd, the truth would enter the boardroom. On January 4th, the truth would enter the world. Even if Dylan managed to survive the meeting, even if he managed to keep his composure in front of his fiancée, the clock was already ticking. The press release would go out. My name, Riley Bailey, founder and CEO, would be plastered across every business feed in the country. His friends would see it. His colleagues would see it. Sloane's father, the senior partner, would definitely see it. There would be no hiding it then. I felt a strange sense of calm. I wasn't planting a bomb. I was just turning on the lights. If the structure of their lies couldn't stand the light, that wasn't my fault. Boom. A dull thud echoed through the glass. Then another. I turned back to the window. The fireworks had started. Great blooms of red and gold were exploding over Elliott Bay, shattering the darkness. They reflected in the glass, painting my living room in sudden, violent bursts of color. I picked up my wine glass again and walked right up to the window. I could see my own reflection in the glass, superimposed over the city I had conquered. I saw a woman with sharp eyes and a straight spine. I saw a woman who looked tired but dangerous. I raised the glass to my reflection. "Happy New Year, Riley," I said softly. The red light of a firework flared, turning the wine in my glass the color of blood. "This year," I whispered, "they are going to learn how to pronounce your name." I drank the wine. It was smooth, complex, and finished with a note of iron. I turned my back on the fireworks, on the city, on the distant party where my family was toasting to a lie. I went back to the table, sat down, and opened the next file. There was still work to do. The calendar on the wall said January 2nd, but the atmosphere inside the boardroom of Strataforge Systems felt like the absolute zero of deep space. This room was my cathedral. It was located on the top floor of the tower, encased in soundproofed glass that offered a 360-degree view of the gray Seattle morning. The table was a single slab of black obsidian, polished to a mirror sheen, cold enough to sap the heat from your forearms if you rested them on it for too long. There were no messy cables, no projectors, no clutter. The screens were embedded directly into the stone surface, invisible until activated. The logo, a stylized geologic stratum, was etched into the frosted glass doors, a subtle reminder of the pressure required to create something solid. I sat at the head of the table. To my right sat Ruth Klein, my chief technology officer. Ruth was a woman who spoke in code and thought in binary. She was wearing a hoodie under a blazer, a look she had earned the right to wear by building the architecture that ran 30% of the West Coast's shipping logistics. To my left sat Mara Jennings, my general counsel. Mara was the opposite of Ruth. She was sharp angles and terrifying competence, a former federal prosecutor who treated contract law like a contact blood sport. We did not speak. We did not need to. We were a phalanx waiting for the invasion. "They are in the elevator," Calvin's voice came through the discreet intercom on the table surface. "Send them in," I said. My voice was calm. My heart rate, monitored by the sensors on my watch, was resting at a steady 62 beats per minute. The double doors slid open with a pneumatic hiss. The delegation from Coastline Freight Logic entered first. Their CEO, a man named Marcus Thorne, looked tired. He had the gray, pasty complexion of a man who had spent the last 6 months trying to stop his ship from sinking. He was followed by his CFO and his COO, men in expensive suits that seemed to hang a little too loosely on their frames. Then came the lawyers. The team from Boardr, Gray Finch, marched in like a Roman legion entering a conquered village. They radiated that specific brand of arrogant confidence that comes from billing $800 an hour. Leading them was Arthur Finch, the senior partner. He was a large man with silver hair and a handshake I knew would be firm and practiced. Behind him were 2 junior associates carrying boxes of files. And then there was the second chair. Sloane Harrington walked in. She was looking down at her tablet, her stylus moving rapidly across the screen. She was wearing the same charcoal suit she had worn in one of the photos from the New Year's party, though the emerald jewelry was gone, replaced by simple pearl studs. She looked professional. She looked focused. She looked entirely unaware that she was walking into the blast radius of her own social circle. I did not stand up. In my boardroom, guests stood until I invited them to sit. It was a power dynamic I had established early on, and I never deviated from it. "Good morning," I said. The group stopped. Marcus Thorne looked at me, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. He had expected to see the frantic energy of a startup founder. Instead, he found a woman sitting in a black architectural chair, motionless as a statue. "Please," I gestured to the empty chairs opposite me. "Sit." There was a shuffling of leather and fabric as 12 people took their seats. Briefcases were snapped open. Laptops were deployed. Water was poured from crystal carafes. Sloane took the seat directly across from Mara. 2 spots down from me, she still had not looked at my face. She was arranging her documents, aligning the edges of her files with a precision that bordered on obsessive. She was whispering something to Arthur Finch, likely a last-minute note on the indemnity clause. The room settled into silence. They were waiting for me to speak. I let the silence stretch. I let it become uncomfortable. I let them wonder if something was wrong. Then, I leaned forward, resting my hands on the black stone. "Welcome to Strataforge," I said. "I believe we have a lot of ground to cover today, so let us dispense with the pleasantries. I am Riley Bailey, founder and CEO." At the sound of my name, the air in the room seemed to vanish. Sloane Harrington's head snapped up. It was not a gradual realization. It was instant. It was violent. Her eyes locked onto mine. For a moment, there was nothing but confusion. Her brain was trying to reconcile two completely incompatible datasets. Dataset A Riley, the embarrassment, the temp worker, the sad sister-in-law who needed charity. Dataset B, the woman sitting in the power seat of a multi-million-dollar corporation, wearing a suit that cost more than Sloane's engagement ring. I watched the color drain from her face. It started at her neck and washed upward, leaving her skin the color of old parchment. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Her hand, which had been holding a silver pen, went limp. Clatter. The pen hit the obsidian table. In the acoustic perfection of the room, it sounded like a hammer striking an anvil. Her tablet slipped from her other hand, sliding across the polished stone until it hit the edge of her water glass with a sharp chink. She did not move to pick it up. She was paralyzed. She was staring at me as if I were a ghost that had just crawled out of the floorboards. Arthur Finch frowned. He looked at Sloane, then at me, sensing the sudden, jagged spike in tension. He was a seasoned litigator. He could smell panic like a shark smells blood. "Sloane," he whispered harshly. She did not answer him. She could not take her eyes off me. Her chest was rising and falling in shallow, rapid hitches. She stammered. Her voice was thin, barely audible. You. Arthur Finch looked back at me, his eyes narrowing in calculation. "Ms. Bailey," he said, his voice smooth but cautious. "Do you and Ms. Harrington know each other?" I held Sloane's gaze. I did not blink. I did not smile. I kept my face completely blank, a mirror reflecting her own terror back at her. "We have met," I said calmly. Sloane flinched. She looked like she was waiting for the blow. She was waiting for me to say, "Yes, she is marrying my brother." She was waiting for me to bring the messy personal drama onto the table and destroy her professional credibility right there. But I was not going to give her that relief. I was not going to make this about family. That would be too easy. That would be emotional. "We met at a function," I continued, my voice bored. "Briefly, I believe it was strictly social." I emphasized the word social with a tone that suggested it was beneath my notice. Sloane made a sound that was half gasp, half sob. She grabbed her water glass, her hand trembling so violently that water sloshed over the rim and stained the leather pad in front of her. "Right," Finch said, looking between us, clearly unconvinced but eager to regain control of the room. "Well, small world, shall we proceed?" "Yes," I said. "Let us proceed." I tapped the surface of the table. The screens in front of everyone lit up simultaneously, displaying the acquisition summary. "As you can see," I began, my voice shifting into a lower register, the voice of the surgeon picking up the scalpel. "The offer is $350 million for 100% of Coastline's equity. This is an all-cash offer. There is no stock swap. There is no financing contingency." I saw Marcus Thorne's eyes widen. Cash. That was the magic word. "However," I continued, pacing my words like a metronome, "this valuation is contingent on a full restructuring of your data architecture within the first quarter. My team has analyzed your legacy systems. To be blunt, they are archaic. You are bleeding 12% of your revenue through routing inefficiencies and another 8% through redundant middle management." I looked directly at the COO. He swallowed hard and looked down. "We are not just buying your trucks and your warehouses," I said. "We are buying your client list, the rest of it the software, the protocols, the management structure we are going to gut." I spoke for 20 minutes. I did not look at notes. I knew every number, every liability, every clause. I dismantled their company piece by piece, laying out its flaws with clinical precision, and then explained exactly how I would rebuild it. The room was mesmerized. Even Arthur Finch was nodding, impressed by the sheer brutality of the logic, but Sloane was disintegrating. She was trying to take notes, but I could see her screen. She was just drawing jagged lines. She was sweating. A sheen of perspiration had broken out on her forehead. Every time I looked in her direction, she flinched. She was waiting for the other shoe to drop. She was waiting for me to mention Dylan. She was realizing, second by agonizing second, that everything she had been told about me was a lie, and if that was a lie, what else was? I said, leaning back. I understand there were some concerns regarding the intellectual property transfer of the proprietary tracking codes. Ms. Harrington, I believe you are the lead on that section. I turned my full attention to her. Ms. Harrington, I asked. The room turned to look at her. Sloane looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed. She looked at me, and in her face, I saw the total collapse of her composure. She opened her mouth to speak about copyright law, about patent infringement, about anything that made sense, but nothing came out. She croaked. She cleared her throat, but the blockage remained. The IP. She looked at Arthur Finch. Panic was radiating off her in waves. I am sorry, she whispered. Her voice cracked. I cannot. She stood up abruptly. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor, a screeching sound that made everyone jump. I need a moment, she said, clutching her tablet to her chest like a shield. Excuse me, please, I need a moment. She did not wait for permission. She turned and practically ran for the door. She fumbled with the handle, her coordination gone, before finally wrenching it open and disappearing into the hallway. The door hissed shut behind her. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with confusion and embarrassment. Arthur Finch looked furious. To have his second chair flee the room in the middle of a multi-million-dollar negotiation was a professional catastrophe. I apologize, Finch said, his face tightening. Ms. Harrington she has been under the weather. I will handle the IP section myself. That would be best, I said. My voice was completely devoid of sympathy. We do not have time for delays. Strataforge operates on efficiency. Mr. Finch, I expect your team to keep up. Of course, Finch said, adjusting his tie. It will not happen again. We continued the meeting. I did not ask if she was okay. I did not ask for a recess. I simply turned the page on the digital display and moved on to the next item, employee severance packages. But as Ruth began to outline the technical integration timeline, I let my gaze drift to the glass wall that separated the boardroom from the outer corridor. Through the layers of soundproof glass, I could see the hallway. Sloane was there. She was standing by the window, her back to the boardroom, her hand pressed against the glass as if she were trying to hold herself upright. She had her phone to her ear. I could see her shoulders shaking. She was speaking rapidly, frantically. She was gesturing with her free hand, a wild, desperate motion. She was calling Dylan. I knew it with the certainty of gravity. She was calling the man who had told her I was a joke. She was calling the man who had told her to ban me from the party to save face. She was asking him why his embarrassment of a sister was currently sitting in a chair worth more than his car. Dissecting his fiancée's career with a surgical knife, I watched her for a moment longer. I watched the way she crumbled. Then, I turned my attention back to the table. Mr. Thorne, I said, interrupting the discussion, let us talk about the earn-out period. I am willing to offer you a shorter timeline, but in exchange, I want full control of the board seats, effective immediately upon signing. I saw Marcus Thorne hesitate, then nod. He was broken. He just wanted to sign and go home. I allowed myself a very small, internal exhale. The bomb had been detonated. The shockwave was currently traveling through the telephone lines, racing toward my brother. He had wanted me to be absent from his life. Well, I was about to become the only thing he could think about. The heavy pneumatic hiss of the boardroom door sealing shut seemed to suck the oxygen right out of the room. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. The empty chair where Sloane Harrington had been sitting looked radioactive. Ruth Klein, my chief technology officer, was the first to break the vacuum. She spun her pen between her fingers, a nervous habit she had picked up during our coding marathons, and let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Okay," Ruth said, her voice cutting through the tension like a wire cutter. "I have seen lawyers cry after a deal goes south. I have seen them throw chairs. But I have never seen one run away before we even opened the prospectus. Did I miss a memo? Did we install an ejector seat?" I didn't smile. I kept my eyes on the closed door, visualizing the chaos unfolding in the hallway. "That," I said, my voice flat and even, "is my brother's fiancée." The silence that followed was different. It wasn't shocked. It was calculating. Mara Jennings, my general counsel, did not gasp. She did not ask for gossip. She immediately shifted into damage control mode. Her eyes narrowed behind her rimless glasses as she mentally scanned through the thousands of pages of legal code stored in her brain. "Conflict of interest," Mara stated, her tone clinical. "Undisclosed personal relationship between the principal of the acquiring entity and counsel for the target, Riley. This is a mess. If they claim we ambushed them, they could try to void the exclusivity period. They could claim bad faith negotiation." "They won't?" I said. "You cannot know that," Mara countered, tapping her finger on the obsidian table. "If Finch finds out you orchestrated this to humiliate his associate, he will drag this out. He has a fiduciary duty to Coastline, but he also has an ego. We need to be careful. Do we need to pause? Do we need to ask them to replace the firm?" I turned my chair slightly to face her. "No, we do not pause. We do not flinch. If we pause, we look guilty. If we continue, we look like we are the only adults in the room." I looked at the empty seats opposite us, where the Coastline executives were huddled, whispering furiously among themselves. They were confused, terrified, and leaderless. "Mara," I said softly, "this isn't a drama. This is a deal. Sloane Harrington is a junior associate. She is irrelevant to the asset purchase agreement. If she cannot handle the room, that is a personnel issue for Barton, Gray, and Finch. It is not a strategic issue for Strataforge." Mara looked at me for a long moment. She was looking for the sister, the woman who might be emotionally compromised. She didn't find her. She found the CEO. "Understood," Mara said. She adjusted her blazer. "Then we treat it as a non-event. If Finch asks, we have no idea why she left. We proceed." "Exactly," I said. A moment later, the door opened. Arthur Finch walked back in. He was alone. He looked composed, but there was a tightness around his jaw that hadn't been there 10 minutes ago. He smoothed his tie, a gesture of resetting his armor. "Apologies for the disruption," Finch said, taking his seat at the head of the opposing side. He did not look at me directly. "Ms. Harrington has suffered a sudden personal health emergency. She has withdrawn from the proceedings for the day. I will be handling her portion of the presentation myself." It was a beautiful lie, elegant, vague, and unchallengeable. "I hope she recovers," I said. My voice was polite, the perfect corporate mask. "Please pass along our regards." "I will," Finch said stiffly. "Now, where were we?" "We were discussing the earn-out clauses," I said, tapping the screen embedded in the table. The data flared to life, casting a cool blue glow on our faces. "Specifically, the $20 million you are asking for, contingent on client retention post-merger." The air in the room shifted instantly. The personal drama evaporated, replaced by the brutal, grinding friction of high-stakes capitalism. This was where I lived. This was chess in a suit. Marcus Thorne, the CEO of Coastline, leaned forward. He saw an opening to regain some leverage after the embarrassment of his legal team. "It is a standard clause, Ms. Bailey," Thorne said, his voice finding some of its old bluster. "We have deep relationships with these shippers. If you acquire us, there is a risk of churn. We are guaranteeing the transition. If we keep 90% of the client base for 12 months, we earn the 20 million. It incentivizes us to help you. I looked at the numbers on my screen. I knew his client list better than he did. I had spent the last 3 weeks analyzing their shipping data, looking for patterns they didn't even know existed. No, I said. Thorn blinked. Excuse me? I am striking the earn-out clause entirely, I said. Finch bristled. That is highly irregular. You are asking the sellers to assume zero upside for the transition risk. I am asking the sellers to face reality, I replied. I swiped a finger across my screen, sending a graph to the main wall display. It showed a jagged red line plummeting downward. This is your client retention rate for the last 18 months, I said. You are not losing clients because of a lack of relationships. Mr. Thorn, you are losing them because your latency on package tracking averages 4 hours. My system does it in real time. You are losing them because your routing algorithm sends trucks into gridlock because it doesn't account for weather patterns. Mine does. I leaned forward, clasping my hands. I do not need you to retain your clients, I said, my voice soft but absolute. I am going to save them from you. Once they switch to the Strataforge platform, their efficiency will increase by 30% in the first week. They are not going to leave. They are going to thank me for buying you. So, no, I will not pay you an extra $20 million to solve a problem that I'm already fixing. Thorn opened his mouth to argue, but he stopped. He looked at the graph. He looked at the data points I had highlighted: delivery times, fuel costs, customer complaint tickets. He realized, in that moment, that I wasn't just buying his company, I had already dissected it. 15 million, Finch tried, his voice lacking conviction. As a gesture of goodwill, 0, I said, but I will increase the severance pool for your warehouse staff by 2 million. I care about the people moving the boxes. Mr. Finch? I do not care about the executives who let the software rot. Thorn let out a long breath. He slumped back in his chair. It wasn't a gesture of defeat. It was a gesture of relief. He was tired of fighting a war he didn't understand. Okay, Thorn said quietly. 0 earn-out. Increase the severance. Finch looked at his client, shocked. Marcus, we should push back on this. No, Thorn said. He looked at me. There was a strange expression on his face. It wasn't anger. It was respect. She is right. The tech is the problem. We couldn't fix it. The rest of the meeting was a blur of technicalities. Mara shredded their indemnity requests. Ruth exposed 3 security vulnerabilities in their server architecture that knocked another $5 million off the closing costs. We were a machine. We were unstoppable. By the time the memorandum of understanding was ready to be signed, it was past 1 in the afternoon. The adrenaline was starting to fade, replaced by a dull, throbbing headache behind my eyes. As we stood up to shake hands, a formality that felt archaic given the brutality of the last 4 hours. Marcus Thorn walked around the table. He was a man in his 60s, a titan of the old industry. He had built Coastline with trucks and sweat in the 80s. Ms. Bailey, he said, extending his hand. I took it. Mr. Thorn, I have to ask, he said, holding my handshake for a second longer than necessary. I read the prospectus. You didn't inherit this, did you? You have no board of directors pulling your strings? You built Strataforge from 0. From 0, I confirmed. From a laptop and a studio apartment. Thorn nodded slowly. He looked at the sleek, futuristic office around us. Impressive, he said, and he meant it. I have met a lot of people who think they run the world because their father gave them a checkbook. It is rare to meet someone who actually built the engine. You are a killer, Ms. Bailey, but you are an honest one. He let go of my hand and walked out with his legal team. I stood there, staring at the door. You are a killer, but you are an honest one. The words rattled around inside my chest. A stranger, a man I had just stripped of his life's work, could see me more clearly than the people who shared my DNA. That was the sting. That was the realization that twisted the knife. My family wasn't ashamed of me because I was a failure. They were ashamed because I didn't fit the script. But if they knew this, if they knew I was a killer in the boardroom, they wouldn't be proud. They would be resentful. They would hate that I had won without their permission. They would hate that they couldn't take credit for the victory. If I was a success, it meant their judgment had been flawed for 30 years. And the one thing the Mercers hated more than failure was being wrong. Riley. Calvin's voice broke my trance. He was standing next to me, holding my personal phone. He looked like he was holding a live grenade. "The meeting is over," Calvin said gently. "We have the MOU, but your phone has been vibrating off the table for the last hour." I looked at the device. The screen was lit up with notifications. "How many?" I asked. 57 missed calls," Calvin said. "Most of them from a contact named Dylan, a dozen from Mom, 7 from Dad." I took the phone. It felt hot in my hand. I unlocked it. The screen was a chaotic waterfall of panic. Dylan, 12:04 p.m. "Pick up the phone." Dylan, 12:05 p.m. "What are you doing?" Dylan, 12:10 p.m. "Sloan is hysterical. She says you're the buyer. Is this a joke?" Mom, 12:30 p.m. "Riley, call your brother immediately. He says you are ruining everything." Dad, 12:45 p.m. "We need to talk. Now. What is this game you are playing?" I scrolled through them. The tone shifted from confusion to anger to desperation. They weren't asking how I did it. They weren't asking if I was proud. They were only concerned with how my success was inconveniencing them. "Sloan is hysterical. You are ruining everything." I had just closed a $350 million deal. I had secured the future of 500 employees. I had reshaped the industry. And my mother's only comment was that I was ruining Dylan's day. I felt a cold, dark laughter bubbling up in my throat again. It was the same laugh I had suppressed when Dylan sent the first text. "Are you okay?" Mara asked, packing up her files. She saw the look on my face. "I am fine," I said. "I am just replying to some fan mail." I opened the family group chat. It had been silent since my "have fun" message the night before. Now, it was a war zone of unanswered questions. I didn't offer an explanation. I didn't offer an apology. I didn't try to justify why I had kept Strataforge a secret. I typed one line. "I never lied. You just never asked." I hit send. I watched the read receipts appear instantly. They were all watching their phones. They were all waiting. "Calvin," I said, handing the phone back to him. "File the MOU. Get the press release ready for the 48-hour trigger." "On it," Calvin said. He started to walk toward the door, then stopped. He looked at his tablet, and his face went pale. He turned back to me. "Riley," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I just got a ping from the front desk security." "Who is it?" I asked. Though I already knew, I could feel it in the air. The storm hadn't just stayed on the phone. It had arrived at the gates. "It is your mother," Calvin said. "Elaine Mercer. She is in the lobby. She is demanding to see you. She told the security guard she is not leaving until you come down, or she is coming up." I looked out the window at the gray skyline. The high of the deal was gone. The chess match in the suit was over. Now, the real fight was beginning. "She doesn't have a security clearance," I said calmly. "But if we make a scene in the lobby, it will end up on social media." I straightened my blazer. I checked my reflection in the black glass. I looked untouchable. "Tell security to issue her a visitor pass," I said. "Escort her to my office. Not the boardroom, my office." "Are you sure?" Mara asked. "I can have legal go down there and remove her." "No," I said. "Legal can't fix this. Mara, this isn't a contract dispute." I walked toward the door. "This is a hostile takeover." My executive office was designed to be a sanctuary. It was a corner suite, walled with soundproof glass that turned the chaos of the city into a silent movie. The decor was minimalist white oak floors, a desk made of reclaimed steel, and a single, expansive view of the Puget Sound. It was a space that usually made me feel calm, centered, and in control. But as Calvin opened the door and ushered my mother in, the room suddenly felt very small. Elaine Mercer did not walk in. She hesitated on the threshold. She was wearing her beige trench coat, belted tightly at the waist, and her hair was perfectly coiffed, though a few strands had escaped, hinting at the frantic drive she must have taken to get here. She held her handbag in a death grip. She looked at the reception area outside. She looked at the frosted glass doors etched with the Strataforge logo. She looked at the assistants typing quietly at their ergonomic workstations, and then she looked at me. I was standing behind my desk, flanked by the floor-to-ceiling windows. I had not taken off my jacket. I was still armored. "Mom," I said. It was not a greeting. It was an acknowledgement of presence. Elaine took 2 steps into the room. Her eyes were darting around, trying to process the visual data that contradicted 30 years of her assumptions. She looked at the expensive abstract art on the wall. She looked at the view that only people with 8-figure net worths got to look at. Then her eyes landed on the coffee table. Sitting there, right in the center, was the current issue of Ledgerline magazine. I had not put it there for her. Calvin kept a copy in the office for visitors. The cover featured a stark, black-and-white portrait of me, looking away from the camera, with the headline, "The Invisible Architect: How Riley Bailey Built a Logistics Empire in the Dark." Elaine walked over to the table. Her movements were stiff, like a marionette with tangled strings. She picked up the magazine. She stared at my face on the cover. She stared at the Strataforge logo behind me on the glossy paper. She looked up, and her expression was a terrifying mix of awe and betrayal. It was the look of someone whose operating system had just crashed. "What is this?" she asked. Her voice was thin, barely a whisper. She gestured vaguely at the room, the magazine, the city below us. "Riley, what is this?" "It is my company," I said. I kept my voice level. "I built it. We launched 6 years ago." 6 years. She repeated the words as if they were in a foreign language. "But you work in IT support. You fix computers. You told us you were struggling with rent last year." "I never told you I was struggling with rent," I corrected her gently. "I told you I was budgeting. You assumed I was poor because it fit the narrative you and Dad wrote for me." Elaine dropped the magazine back onto the table. It made a slap sound that echoed in the quiet room. The shock was fading, replaced rapidly by the defensive indignation that was her default setting whenever she felt foolish. "How could you not tell us?" she demanded. Her voice rose, gaining strength. "We are your family. Riley, we have been worried sick about you. We have spent years trying to help you, trying to guide you. And you were what? Playing pretend. Laughing at us behind our backs." "I was not laughing," I said. I walked around the desk and leaned against the edge of it, crossing my arms. "I was working, and I did not tell you because you never asked. Not really. When was the last time you asked me about my day without pivoting to how Dylan was doing? When was the last time you asked about my interests without suggesting I try to be more like my sister?" "That is not fair," Elaine snapped. "We only wanted the best for you. We pushed you because we thought you were drifting. You pushed me because I embarrassed you," I said. "And I did not tell you about this because I knew what you would do. You would have told me it was too risky. You would have told me to sell it before I failed. Or worse, you would have tried to take credit for it." Elaine flinched. She clutched her purse tighter. "We are your parents. We have a right to know if our daughter is a CEO. You have the right to know the person you bothered to get to know," I said. "You did not want to know the CEO. You wanted to know the screw-up. It made you feel safer about Dylan." At the mention of his name, Elaine's face crumbled. The anger dissolved into panic. This was why she was here. Not for me. Never for me. "Dylan," she gasped, stepping closer. "Riley, you have to fix this. You have absolutely destroyed him." "I have been in this building since 7 in the morning, I said coldly. "I have not spoken to Dylan. I have not seen him. How exactly did I destroy him?" "Sloan," Elaine cried out. "Sloan called me an hour ago. She was sobbing. She was incoherent. She said she walked into a meeting and found you running the table. She said you treated her like a stranger." "I treated her like opposing counsel," I said. "Because that is what she was." She said Dylan lied to her. Elaine's voice cracked. She said Dylan told her you were a charity case. She asked me if we all knew. I felt a flicker of interest. And what did you say? Elaine looked away, her face flushing a deep, shameful red. I tried to explain. I told her we were just trying to protect you, that we did not want to put pressure on you, but she would not listen. She said, Elaine swallowed hard. She said if Dylan could lie about his own sister for 3 years, what else is he hiding? She is talking about postponing the wedding. Riley, she is talking about reviewing his financials. I stood up straight. A cold satisfaction settled in my chest. Then she is asking the right questions, I said. Elaine looked at me with horror. How can you say that? This is your brother's life. This is the biggest match he has ever made. The Harringtons are society people. Riley, if this wedding falls through, the scandal will be unbearable. Dylan will be ruined. Dylan is a 38-year-old man, I said. If his life can be ruined by his fiancée finding out that his sister is successful, then his foundation was made of sand to begin with. Elaine stepped forward and grabbed my arm. Her fingers dug into the fabric of my suit jacket. You have to help him, she pleaded. You have to call Sloan. Tell her it was a misunderstanding. Tell her you wanted to keep it a secret for legal reasons. Tell her Dylan didn't know. Lie for him. Riley, please, just this once. Be a good sister. I looked down at her hand on my arm. It was the hand that used to pat my head patronizingly when I brought home a B+. It was the hand that had waved away my ideas at the dinner table. I gently, but firmly, removed her hand from my sleeve. No, I said. Elaine stepped back as if I had slapped her. What? I am not the PR department for this family, I said. My voice was steel. I am not going to call Sloan and lie to a woman who is smart enough to see the truth. I respect her too much as a professional to do that, and I respect myself too much to shrink back down so Dylan can feel tall. You are selfish, Elaine hissed, the tears in her eyes turning hard. You have always been selfish. You get a little bit of money, a little bit of power, and you think you are better than us. You are willing to burn this family to the ground just to prove a point. I didn't light the match. Mom, I said. Dylan did. He told me I was an embarrassment. He told me not to come to the party because I wasn't good enough for his new life. Well, he got his wish. I wasn't at the party. I was at work. And now he has to deal with the employee he sent to check on me. Elaine opened her mouth to scream, to beg, to curse. I wasn't sure which, but before she could speak, the intercom on my desk buzzed. Riley? Calvin's voice cut through the room. He sounded tense. I walked over and pressed the button. Yes, Calvin? Security just called from the lobby, Calvin said. Dylan is here, Elaine gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. He is attempting to bypass the turnstiles, Calvin continued. The guards are holding him, but he is making a scene. He is shouting that he needs to see you. He says he is your brother. I looked at Elaine. She looked terrified. She knew what Dylan was like when his reality was threatened. He was a cornered animal. Let him up, I said into the intercom. Are you sure? Calvin asked. He sounds unstable. Let him up, I repeated. But just him, no one else, and tell security to stand outside my door. Copy that, Calvin said. The line went dead. He is going to be furious, Elaine whispered. She looked around the room, as if looking for a place to hide. Riley, please, don't provoke him. I am not going to provoke him, I said. I walked back behind my desk. I sat down in my leather chair. I placed my hands on the cool surface of the desk. I am just going to let him see. We waited in silence. It was a long, agonizing 3 minutes. I could hear the hum of the HVAC system. I could hear Elaine's ragged breathing. Then, heavy footsteps echoed in the corridor, fast, angry. The door to my office didn't open. It was thrown open. It banged against the stop with a violence that made the glass rattle. Dylan stood there. He looked nothing like the polished, golden god from the New Year's photos. His tie was loosened, pulled to the side. His hair was windblown. His face was flushed a deep, blotchy red. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving. He stepped into the room, his eyes wild, looking for a fight. "You," he snarled, pointing a finger at me. "You think this is funny? You think you can just—" And then he stopped. He stopped because he actually saw the room. He saw the panoramic view of the city that he had always claimed to own, but never actually conquered. He saw the expansive, minimalist luxury of the furniture. He saw the magazine on the table with my face on it. He saw our mother standing in the corner, looking small and defeated. And finally, he saw me. I was sitting in the high-backed executive chair, silhouetted against the gray sky. I wasn't the little sister in the hoodie. I wasn't the weirdo in the basement. I was the CEO of the company that had just bought his fiancée's client. Dylan's mouth closed. His hand dropped to his side. The rage in his eyes didn't disappear, but it shifted. It curdled into something else, something I had never seen directed at me before. Fear. He looked at me the way a peasant looks at a king who has just revealed himself in the village square. He looked at me and realized, for the first time in his 38 years, that he was standing in a room he could not afford, looking at a woman he did not know. He took a step forward, but it was hesitant. The floor suddenly seemed slippery to him. "Riley," he said. His voice was cracked, stripped of all its usual bravado. It was the voice of a man who had walked into his own house and found that the locks had been changed. I didn't stand up. I didn't smile. "Hello, Dylan," I said. "I heard you had a question about my situation." The air in the office was so thick with tension it felt flammable. My mother was pressed against the wall near the bookshelf, clutching her purse like a shield, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and confusion. But I was not looking at her. My gaze was fixed on my brother, who was standing in the center of the room, vibrating with a rage that was rapidly consuming him. "You made me look like a clown," Dylan spat. The words came out wet and heavy, landing on my desk like mud. "You set this up. You knew Sloane was coming here, and you sat there like a spider, waiting to humiliate her, waiting to humiliate me." I sat perfectly still. I did not raise my voice. I did not stand up to meet his aggression. I stayed in my chair, the leather cool against my back, maintaining the physical hierarchy of the room. "I did not write the script, Dylan," I said, my voice calm, contrasting sharply with his hysteria. "You did. You are the one who told her I was a failure. You are the one who told her I was not worth meeting. All I did was show up to my job." "Your job," Dylan laughed. But it was a manic, broken sound. He fumbled in his pocket and ripped out his phone. He swiped at the screen with shaking fingers, nearly dropping it twice before he thrust it toward me. "This isn't a job. Riley, this is insane." He turned the screen to face me. It was the digital edition of Ledgerline. He had found the article. He must have been reading it in the elevator or in the lobby while security held him back. "They are saying this company is worth $600 million, Dylan shouted. $600 million. They are estimating your personal net worth at over $200 million. Is that true? Is that number real?" I looked at the screen, then back at him. "The valuation is based on our last Series C funding round. The market cap will likely adjust upward after the Coastline acquisition closes. So, yes, it is accurate." Dylan stared at me, his mouth working silently. He looked like I had just slapped him across the face. The numbers offended him. The reality of my wealth felt like a personal insult to his existence. "Why did you hide it?" he demanded. His voice dropped, trembling with a sense of betrayal that I found almost fascinating. "We are your family. We have been scraping by, worrying about you, trying to help you, and you were sitting on $200 million. You let Mom and Dad worry about their retirement while you were playing billionaire in secret." "I bought their mortgage 3 years ago," I said quietly. Dylan froze. "What?" "Mom and Dad's house," I said. "The bank was going to foreclose when Dad's pension took a hit. I bought the note through a shell corporation. I lowered the interest rate to 0. They sent a check for $800 a month to an LLC that I own, and I put that money into a savings account for their health care. I didn't hide anything that mattered. Dylan, I just hid the name on the deed. My mother let out a small, strangled gasp from the corner. Riley, you own the house. I ignored her. I kept my eyes on Dylan. And to answer your question, I continued, I didn't hide my life from you because I wanted to trick you. I stopped bringing myself to people who didn't want to look. Every time I tried to talk about my work, you cut me off. Every time I had an idea, you told me to be realistic. You didn't want to see me. Dylan, you wanted to see a version of me that made you feel better about yourself. That is bullshit, Dylan yelled. He slammed his hand down on the edge of my desk. I was trying to help you. I was the big brother. I was supposed to… You were supposed to what? I interrupted, my voice sharpening. Be the star. Be the only one who mattered. I opened the top drawer of my desk. I pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a printout of the screenshot I had taken on December 28th. I slid it across the steel desk toward him. Read it, I said. Dylan looked down. He saw the timestamp. 3:47 in the afternoon. He saw his own name at the top. Don't come to New Year's. Serious request. Sloan and I talked about the guest list. Look, I love you, but your life is an embarrassment right now. Sloan doesn't know about your situation, and I want to keep it that way. He stared at the paper. The words, your life is an embarrassment, seemed to glow on the page, stark and black against the white. He looked up at me, and then he looked around the office again. He looked at the view of the city. He looked at the awards on the shelf. He looked at the sheer, undeniable power that radiated from every inch of the room. And then he looked back at the text message where he had called all of this an embarrassment. His face turned a sickly shade of gray. The cognitive dissonance was tearing him apart. He couldn't reconcile the sister he had bullied with the CEO who could buy and sell his entire career before lunch. Dylan started, his voice hollow. I didn't mean it like that. I was just stressed. The wedding planning. The pressure from her dad. You meant every word, I said. You told Sloan I was a loser. You told her I was bouncing between jobs. Why, Dylan, why was it so important for her to think I was nothing? Dylan slumped. The fight seemed to drain out of him, leaving only a pathetic, naked honesty. He ran a hand through his hair, messing up the styling even more. Because she comes from money. Riley, he whispered. Real money. Old money. Her dad is a partner at Barton, Gray and Finch. Her cousins are investment bankers. I'm a regional sales manager. I drive a leased Audi. I have $30,000 in credit card debt just trying to keep up with them. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for understanding. I needed to be the success story, he admitted. I needed to be the one who made it out. If I told her my little sister was a tech mogul, if I told her you were this, then who am I? I'm just the brother. I'm the less successful sibling. I'm nobody. The silence that followed was heavy. My mother was sobbing quietly in the corner, her hand over her mouth. I looked at him, this man I had spent my whole life looking up to, trying to please, trying to emulate, and all I saw was a small, insecure boy standing in a man's suit. How small do I have to be for you to feel big? I asked. The question hung in the air. It wasn't an accusation. It was a genuine inquiry. Dylan flinched. He couldn't answer. Instead, he switched tactics. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by a desperate, scrambling panic. Okay, he said, his voice speeding up. Okay, look, we can fix this. Sloan is freaking out. But I can talk her down. I can tell her we were estranged. I can tell her I didn't know. But you have to help me. He leaned over the desk, his eyes wide. You cannot announce this deal yet, he said. You have to delay the press release. If that news hits the wire in 48 hours, it's over. Her dad will see it. Everyone will see it. It will prove I am a liar. You have to wait. Just wait until after the wedding. Give me 3 months. Please. I looked at him with pity. He still didn't get it. Dylan, I said, this is a $350 million acquisition involving 2 public entities and hundreds of shareholders. There are legal disclosure requirements. There are SEC regulations. I cannot pause a merger because you are afraid of your father-in-law. You own the company. Dylan shouted. You can do whatever you want. Just hold the press release. Say there is a technical delay. Anything. No, I said. The company does not stop for your wedding. The press release goes out on the morning of January 4th. Dylan's face twisted. The desperation turned ugly. His jaw clenched, and his eyes narrowed into slits. You are enjoying this, he hissed. You want to ruin me. You want to see me fail. I don't think about you enough to want you to fail, I said truthfully. I am just doing my job. If you release that statement, Dylan threatened, his voice dropping to a low, nasty growl, I will destroy you, Riley. You think you are so perfect. You think you can just rewrite history. I know things about you. I know about... He faltered, realizing he actually didn't know anything about my adult life. So he pivoted. I will go on social media. I will tell everyone what a cold, heartless bitch you are. I will tell them how you abandoned your family. I will paint you as a monster who hates her own parents. Let's see how your stock price likes that. I didn't blink. I didn't have to. The door behind him opened. Mara Jennings walked in. She didn't look at Dylan. She looked at me. She was holding a tablet. Everything all right, Ms. Bailey? Mara asked. Her tone was casual, but her stance was ready for combat. My brother was just leaving, I said, but he had some interesting ideas about a social media campaign he wanted to run. Mara turned her head slowly to look at Dylan. She adjusted her glasses. Mr. Mercer, she said. Her voice was like liquid nitrogen. I am Mara Jennings, General Counsel for Strataforge. The room you are standing in is recorded for security purposes. We have audio and video of the last 10 minutes. Dylan went pale. If you post, publish, or whisper a single defamatory statement about Ms. Bailey or this company, Mara continued, taking a step toward him, I will not just sue you. I will incinerate you. I will tie you up in litigation for the next 20 years. I will garnish your wages until you are retiring on Social Security. And considering you just admitted to fraud by misrepresentation to your future spouse regarding your financial and familial status, I imagine your credibility is already quite fragile. Mara smiled. It was a terrifying smile. Do we understand each other? She asked. Dylan looked from Mara to me. He looked at the printed text message on the desk. He looked at his mother, who was now weeping openly into a tissue. He realized he had no cards left to play. He was outgunned, outspent, and outsmarted. He straightened his jacket with a jerky, aggressive motion. He glared at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. You are sick, he spat. You are cold, and you are sick. You might have all this money, Riley, but you have no family. You just blew it up. I hope you are happy alone in your glass tower. He turned and stormed toward the door. You will destroy this family, he shouted over his shoulder as he reached the threshold. No, Dylan, I said softly. My voice didn't carry far, but in the silence of the room, it was loud enough. He paused, his hand on the doorframe. I didn't break the family, I said. I just stopped being the doormat you used to keep it clean. He didn't respond. He slammed the door behind him, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Silence rushed back into the room. My mother was still crying. Mara was checking her watch. I sat there, staring at the empty chair where my brother had stood. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't joy. It was the feeling of a heavy weight, one I had been carrying for 30 years, finally being set down. Mara, I said, my voice steady. Please have security escort Mr. Mercer off the premises and revoke his guest pass permanently. Already done, Mara said. I looked at the text message on the desk one last time. Your life is an embarrassment. I picked up the paper, crumpled it into a ball, and dropped it into the metal wastebasket under my desk. Now, I said, turning to my mother, do you want some water? Or are you going to leave too? The city at night was a different beast from the gray, rain-slicked creature of the morning. from the corner table of a quiet, low-lit jazz bar in Capitol Hill. Seattle looked almost romantic. I wasn't there for romance, though. I was there because at 9:30 in the evening, my personal phone had rung. The number was unknown, but the voice was familiar, though it lacked the panicked hysteria my mother had described. "It is Sloan," she had said. "We need to talk. Not about the wedding, about the deal." Now, she was sitting across from me. She had changed out of her suit into jeans and a cashmere sweater. She looked exhausted. Her eyes were puffy, but her jaw was set. She didn't look like a blushing bride. She looked like a lawyer who had just realized her star witness was perjuring himself. She ordered a sparkling water. I ordered a neat whiskey. We sat in silence for a moment, the ghost of the morning's boardroom confrontation hovering between us. "I owe you an apology," Sloan said finally. She didn't look down. She looked me straight in the eye. "For the scene this morning, it was unprofessional. I panicked. It was a human reaction," I said, swirling my drink. "You were expecting a temp worker. You got a shark. Most people would have flinched." Sloan let out a short, dry laugh. "A shark? That is an understatement. You dissected Marcus Thorne like a frog in biology class." She took a sip of water, then set the glass down with a deliberate clink. "I did not come here to talk about Dylan's feelings," she said. "I came here because I am a lawyer, and I hate being lied to, by anyone, my client, or my fiancé." I leaned back. "Go on." "When I left the meeting," Sloan said, her voice lowering, "I didn't just go cry in the bathroom. I started digging. I pulled Dylan's credit report. I have access to some specialized databases through the firm." She paused, looking around to make sure no one was listening. "He told me he was a partner in a real estate syndicate," Sloan said. "He told me his liquidity was tied up in long-term commercial holds. That is why I have been paying for the wedding deposits. That is why I put the down payment on the condo." I felt a familiar tightening in my stomach. "And he has nothing," Sloan whispered. "He is $140,000 in debt, credit cards, personal loans, a failed investment in a crypto scheme 2 years ago. He is maxed out. He has been cycling balance transfers to keep his credit score artificially high." I wasn't surprised. I had suspected it, but hearing the number out loud was still a blow. Dylan wasn't just a liar. He was a drowning man looking for a life raft. "He was going to use me," Sloan said. The realization was stark in her voice. "He was pushing for a joint account after the wedding. He was going to use my family's name, my credit, to bail himself out. He built this whole persona, the successful businessman, the golden boy, just to catch me." She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of kinship. "And he used you to do it," she said. "He had to make you look small so no one would ask why his successful family wasn't helping him. If you were a failure, then his lack of money made sense. He was the only one making it. But if you are a multimillionaire, then why is he broke?" "Because he spends money he doesn't have to impress people he doesn't like," I said. Sloan nodded slowly. "I feel like an idiot. I bought it. I bought the whole package." "He is good at selling," I said. "It is the one thing he is actually good at." Sloan took a deep breath. She reached into her bag and pulled out a manila folder. She slid it across the table toward me. "This is not me being a vindictive ex-fiancé," she said. "This is me being a professional. I cannot let you sign that deal on Thursday blindly. Not with what I know." I looked at the folder. "What is this?" "Look at page 42 of the disclosure schedule," Sloan said. "The Coastline legal team, my bosses, are trying to bury it. There is a change of control provision in their contract with their largest client, Apex Retail. It is not in the main contract. It is in a forgotten addendum from 5 years ago." I frowned and opened the folder. I scanned the highlighted text. My heart skipped a beat. In the event of an acquisition or change in majority ownership, Apex Retail reserves the right to terminate this agreement with 30 days' notice without penalty. Apex is 30% of their revenue, I said, looking up. If they walk, the valuation I gave them is off by $60 million. Exactly, Sloane said. Thorne knows. Finch knows. They are gambling that your due diligence team wouldn't find it because it wasn't digitized in the main data room. They were going to let you sign. Then pray Apex didn't notice. I looked at Sloane. This was a career-ending move. If her firm found out she had leaked privileged information to the opposing party, she would be disbarred. Why are you giving me this? I asked. You are representing them. I am representing the law, Sloane said firmly. And I am representing myself. Dylan tried to trap me in a lie. My firm is trying to trap you in a lie. I am done with lies. Riley, I am done being the prop in someone else's con game. She leaned forward. Consider this a peace offering, or a warning. Use it how you want, but do not let them screw you. I closed the folder. I looked at this woman, the woman my family had worshipped, the woman I was supposed to be jealous of. I didn't see a rival. I saw a survivor. She was just waking up to the reality I had lived in for years, that the Mercer men were great at building facades and terrible at building foundations. Thank you, I said. This changes everything. I pulled out my phone and texted Mara Jennings immediately. Check Apex contract addendums, physical archives, look for change of control clause, verify tonight. I looked back at Sloane. What are you going to do? Sloane swirled her water. She looked at the ring on her finger, a ring I now knew Dylan probably bought on a credit card he couldn't pay off. I don't know if I can marry him, she said quietly. It is not just the debt. I could handle debt. It is the deception. He looked me in the face for 2 years and pretended to be someone else. He made me hate his sister based on a fabrication. If he can do that, what else is he capable of? She looked at me, searching for an answer, searching for me to tell her that Dylan was a good guy deep down, that he was just stressed, that he deserved a second chance. I took a sip of my whiskey. It burned, clean and honest. I cannot tell you what to do, Sloane, I said. I am not going to advise you to leave him, and I'm not going to advise you to stay. That is not my place. I set the glass down. But I will tell you this, I am done lying to save his reputation. If you ask me a question, I will answer it with the truth. If you ask me about the house, I will tell you. If you ask me about the company, I will tell you. I am done being the collateral damage for his ego. Sloane nodded. She looked relieved. That is all I ask. My phone buzzed. It was Mara. Confirmed. It was buried in a scanned PDF labeled Miss C Correspondence. Good catch. This gives us massive leverage. We can knock the price down by at least $40 million or demand an escrow holdback. I showed the screen to Sloane. You just saved Strataforge $40 million, I said. Sloane smiled, but it was a sad, weary smile. Good. At least one of us is getting a good deal out of this family. She stood up and buttoned her coat. I should go. I have a wedding to reevaluate, and a deposition in the morning. Sloane, I said, standing up as well. She turned back. You are a good lawyer, I said. Don't let Finch bully you. You saw the trap. He didn't. Sloane straightened her spine. For a second, the terrified girl from the boardroom was gone, replaced by the shark I had expected. I know, she said. See you on Thursday. Riley? She walked out into the night. I sat back down and finished my whiskey. Thursday. 48 hours until the signing. The deal was now secure. With this information, I had Coastline by the throat. I could dictate terms, demand protections, and ensure Strataforge was bulletproof, but the real explosion wasn't going to be the acquisition. I thought about Dylan, probably pacing in his apartment right now, frantically trying to figure out how to spin this, how to manipulate Sloane back into submission. He didn't know that the foundation had already cracked. He didn't know that the two women he had tried to play against each other had just sat down and compared notes. He thought he was fighting a battle on two fronts, keeping his fiancée happy and keeping his sister quiet. He didn't realize the fronts had just merged. I looked at the calendar on my phone. January 2nd, the signing ceremony. It was going to be a bloodbath. Not for me, not for the company, but for the lie my brother had been living. It was going to be an execution. The 48 hours leading up to the signing ceremony were not a countdown. They were a siege. The silence that had followed Dylan's storming out of my office did not last. It was merely the eye of the hurricane, and by the next morning, the winds had returned with hurricane force, but this time, the assault did not come in the form of shouting matches in my lobby. It came through the digital channels, a relentless barrage of guilt, manipulation, and audacious entitlement that proved my family had learned absolutely nothing. I sat at my desk, my phone flat on the steel surface, watching the notifications roll in like waves crashing against a seawall. My mother had changed tactics. She was no longer demanding. She was pleading. Her voicemails were masterpieces of passive-aggressive martyrdom. "Riley, please, you have made your point. But you cannot leave your brother out in the cold like this. Sloane's parents are asking questions. Just call them. Tell them you were exaggerating. Tell them Strataforge is a family business. Just give him something to stand on. We are begging you." I deleted the voicemail without finishing it. Strataforge is a family business. The audacity was breathtaking. They wanted to claim ownership of the thing they had mocked, just to use it as a prop for Dylan's ego. Then came the text from Brooke, my sister, the socialite, the woman who had once told me my choice of footwear was social suicide, had apparently decided that my sudden wealth was an opportunity for networking. Brooke to 14 Nan. A.M. Hey. Rye crazy. Few days. Huh. Look, obviously things are tense, but Steve and I were talking. Since you are acquiring Coastline, you are going to need new insurance vendors for their fleet, right? Steve's firm handles commercial logistics liability. I told him you would prioritize family. Let me know when he can pitch you. Love ya. I stared at the screen, blinking slowly. My brother was imploding. My mother was having a breakdown, and Brooke was trying to secure a commission for her husband. It was so perfectly, grotesquely on brand that I almost admired the consistency. They did not see me as a person. They saw me as a resource. Before, I was the resource they used to feel superior. Now, I was the resource they wanted to mine for cash. Then came the message from my father. Dad, 11:00 a.m. Riley, enough is enough. You have had your fun scaring Dylan, but you need to stop playing God. You are making the family look dysfunctional. Don't overdo it. Remember where you came from. Remember where you came from. I looked at the view of the Puget Sound. I remembered exactly where I came from. I came from a basement where I soldered circuit boards alone while they threw parties upstairs. I pressed the intercom button. "Mara," I said. "Come in. Bring the laptop." Mara Jennings entered 30 seconds later. She looked sharp, energized, and ready for violence. "What is the status?" I asked. "The deal documents are finalized," Mara said, setting her laptop down. "We incorporated the price adjustment based on the Apex retail clause Sloane gave us. We knocked $40 million off the purchase price." Coastline screamed, but they folded. They knew we had them. "Good," I said. "Now, I need you to handle a separate matter. It is personal, but it is affecting my ability to work." I pointed to my phone. "My family is escalating," I said. "They are contacting me through personal channels to influence business decisions. My sister is soliciting vendor contracts. My parents are demanding I alter the public narrative of the acquisition to suit my brother's social standing." Mara's eyes narrowed behind her glasses. "Do you want me to block them?" "No," I said. "I want you to formalize it. I want a firewall." I took a breath. This was the moment I cut the cord. "Draft an email from your office to Dylan, Brooke, and my parents," I instructed. "State that due to the sensitive nature of the pending acquisition and the strict SEC regulations regarding insider communication, all further contact with me must go through the General Counsel's office. Tell them that any attempt to solicit business, influence corporate strategy, or discuss the financial details of Strataforge will be treated as a violation of corporate governance protocols." Mara typed rapidly. "You know this is the nuclear option, right? This treats them like hostile third parties." "They are hostile third parties," I said. "Send it." Mara hit send. The digital barrier was up, but Dylan, true to his nature, did not just bang against the wall. He tried to tunnel under it. At 2 in the afternoon, Calvin rushed into my office. He didn't knock. His face was pale. "Riley," he said, breathless. "We have a problem. Marcus Thorne is on line 1. He sounds rattled." I picked up the secure line. "Marcus, we are less than 48 hours from signing. Please tell me you are not getting cold feet." "I am not getting cold feet, Riley." Marcus Thorne's voice was tight, anxious. "But I just got a very disturbing phone call from a man claiming to be your brother." I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second. "Go on." "He told me that I should be careful," Thorne said. "He intimated that Strataforge is legally unstable. He said there is significant family litigation pending that could freeze your assets. He suggested that the leadership of this company is emotionally compromised." My grip on the receiver tightened until my knuckles turned white. Dylan wasn't just trying to save face anymore. He was trying to torch the deal. He was willing to destroy my life's work and the jobs of 500 people just to punish me for being successful. "Marcus," I said, my voice ice cold, "listen to me very carefully. There is no litigation. There is no instability. My brother is a desperate man with a credit score of 500 who is currently being investigated by his own fiancée for fraud. He is lashing out because I refused to delay the press release." There was a silence on the other end. "I see," Thorne said slowly. He did sound frantic. He offered to tell me the real story if I met him for a drink. "Do not meet him," I said. "If he contacts you again, record the call. My general counsel will handle the rest." "Understood," Thorne said. "See you Thursday." "Riley." I hung up. The red mist of anger that had been hovering at the edge of my vision cleared, leaving behind a crystalline, razor-sharp focus. "Mara," I called out. She was already standing in the doorway. She had heard my side of the call. "I heard," Mara said. "Tortious interference, slander, attempted sabotage of a commercial transaction. Bury him," I said. "I will draft a cease and desist order that will make his ancestors bleed," Mara said grimly. "I will have a courier deliver it to his apartment within the hour. If he says one more word to anyone connected to this deal, we will file a restraining order and a lawsuit for damages that will bankrupt him 3 times over." "Do it," I said. The afternoon wore on. The sun began to dip, painting the office in long, melancholic shadows. I was reviewing the final press release drafts when my personal cell phone rang again. It was my father. I stared at the screen. I had blocked his text messages, but I hadn't blocked his calls. A part of me, the stupid, childlike part that still wanted a dad, couldn't sever that last link. I picked up. "This has to stop, Riley," Tom Mercer said. His voice wasn't angry this time. It was heavy, weary, and laced with a desperation I had never heard before. "We got the email from your lawyer. Are you crazy? We are your parents. Then stop acting like lobbyists for Dylan," I said. "We are just trying to hold this family together." Tom shouted, his composure cracking. "Do you have any idea what is happening? Sloan is not answering Dylan's calls. The wedding venue is demanding the final payment by Friday. Dylan doesn't have the liquidity. He is in a bad spot." "Riley." "I know," I said. "I know exactly how much debt he is in." "We can't let him lose this girl," Tom said. "She is his future. If this wedding falls apart, it will crush him. So your mother and I are going to the bank tomorrow." I froze. "Why are you going to the bank?" "We are going to take out a home equity line of credit," Tom said, his voice trembling slightly with the gravity of the decision. "We have lived in that house for 30 years. There is enough equity to cover the wedding costs and pay off Dylan's immediate debts. It is a risk, but we have to do it. We have to support him." I felt the blood drain from my face. They were going to mortgage their retirement. They were going to leverage the roof over their heads to bail out their golden boy, to perpetuate a lie that was already dead. They were willing to risk homelessness for Dylan, when they had told me to be realistic about my dreams. But there was a bigger problem. "Dad," I said. My voice was very quiet. "You cannot do that. Don't tell me what I can do with my own house, Tom snapped. I am still the patriarch of this family. Riley, I don't need your permission. No, Dad, I said. You don't understand. You literally cannot do it. The bank won't give you the loan. My credit is fine, he argued. The house is in my name. The deed is in your name, I said, but the lien is held by a company called Archimedes Holdings, LLC. Tom paused. Yes, the mortgage company. We pay them every month. What about it? I took a deep breath. I walked to the window. I looked out at the city I had conquered, feeling the immense weight of the secret I had carried for 3 years. Dad, I said, I am Archimedes Holdings. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It was the sound of a universe collapsing. What? He whispered. 3 years ago, I said, speaking clearly and slowly. When you told us the bank was threatening foreclosure because of your medical bills, you thought the bank sold the note to a private equity firm that offered you a lower rate. They didn't. I bought the note. I paid off the bank in cash. $212,000. I formed the LLC to hold the debt so you wouldn't know it was me. I set the interest rate to 0. The $800 you send every month, it goes into a high-yield savings account under your name. I haven't touched a cent of it. Tom stammered. You own the house. I own the debt, I corrected. And I will not authorize a second lien. I will not let you risk your home to pay for a wedding that isn't going to happen, for a son who lied to get it. But Tom's voice broke. He sounded small. He sounded old. But you were fixing computers. You were struggling. I was never struggling, Dad, I said. I was building, and while I was building, I was making sure you and Mom were safe. I saved your house, me, the worker bee, the embarrassment. I heard a sound on the other end of the line. It was a sob. My father, the stoic, proud man who had spent his life praising my brother and tolerating me, was crying. Riley, he choked out. Oh my God. Don't go to the bank, Dad, I said softly. Go to sleep, and stop trying to save Dylan. You can't save someone who refuses to wake up. I hung up the phone. I stood there for a long time, listening to the dial tone in my mind. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollowed out. The truth was out, and it had crushed him just as I knew it would. My phone pinged with a text. It was Sloan. Sloan, 8:45 p.m. My father knows. I told him everything. About the debt. About the lies. About you. I stared at the message, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Sloan, 8:46 p.m. He wants to come to the signing tomorrow, not as opposing counsel. He wants to meet you. He says he wants to shake the hand of the person who actually has the integrity in the Mercer family. We will see you at 9 a.m. I lowered the phone. Tomorrow was the day, January 2nd. The signing ceremony was no longer just a business transaction. It was a reckoning. My brother had tried to blow it up. My parents had tried to mortgage their souls for it. And now, the senior partner of the most powerful law firm in the city was coming to witness the end of the charade. I turned off the lights in my office. I didn't go home. I had a suite in the hotel across the street. I needed to be close. I needed to be ready. As I walked out of the building, the cold night air hit my face. I felt strange. I felt calm. It was the calm of a soldier the night before the final battle, when the fear is gone because the outcome is already in motion. I wasn't afraid of Dylan anymore. I wasn't afraid of my parents' judgment. I wasn't afraid of being the embarrassment. The truth was expensive. It had cost me my family's comfort. It had cost me the illusion of their love. But as I looked up at the Strataforge logo glowing in the night sky, I knew one thing for certain. It was cheaper than living a lie. The morning of January 2nd arrived with the gray, relentless drizzle that Seattle wore like a uniform. But inside the Strataforge conference room, the air was scrubbed clean and pressurized. This was not a meeting. It was a coronation. The room was at capacity. My entire board of directors was present, sitting in a row like a tribunal of judges. The Coastline Freight, Logic executives were huddled on the left. looking like men who were about to sign away their kingdom, but were relieved to be done with the burden. The legal team from Barton. Gray and Finch occupied the right flank, their black suits forming a solid wall of billing hours. Standing along the back glass were the PR representatives, holding tablets that contained the press release set to trigger the moment my pen left the paper. I sat at the head of the obsidian table. I was wearing the midnight blue suit I had chosen on New Year's Eve. I felt calm. It was a terrifying kind of calm, the stillness of a deep ocean trench where the pressure is immense but the water never moves. Mara Jennings leaned over to me. "We are ready," she whispered. "All contingencies are cleared. The price adjustment is locked." I nodded. "Let's begin." But before I could signal Calvin to close the doors, he stepped up to my chair. His face was tight. "Riley," he said, his voice barely audible over the hum of conversation. "He is here again." I did not have to ask who. Security stopped him at the elevators. Calvin continued rapidly. "He is claiming he is a shareholder. He is claiming he is family proxy. He is making a scene, but he is not shouting this time. He is begging. He says he just wants to be in the room." I looked at the heavy glass doors. I thought about the man who had texted me to stay away from his party because I was an embarrassment. I thought about the man who had leveraged our parents' home to fund a lie. He wanted to be in the room. He wanted to see the big life he thought he deserved. "Let him up," I said. Calvin blinked. "Riley, are you sure he could disrupt the signing?" "He won't," I said. "Tell security to escort him in. He sits in the back row, in the observer chairs. He does not speak. He does not approach the table. If he makes a single sound, remove him. One strike." Calvin nodded and spoke into his headset. 2 minutes later, the doors opened. Dylan walked in. He was flanked by 2 large security guards. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. He was wearing a suit, but it looked slept in. His eyes were darting around the room, taking in the scale of it, the dozens of people, the flashing screens, the sheer magnitude of the Capitol gathering in this room. He saw me at the head of the table. He started to raise a hand, perhaps to wave, perhaps to claim some connection. But the guard placed a firm hand on his shoulder and guided him to a folding chair in the far corner, behind the PR team. He sat down. He looked like a child who had snuck into an R-rated movie and was terrified of getting caught. "Close the doors," I said. As the doors began to slide shut, a hand blocked the censor. "One moment," a deep voice boomed. The doors retracted. Sloane Harrington walked in. She was not alone. Walking beside her was an older man with silver hair and a posture that commanded instant respect. Robert Harrington, senior partner at Barton, Gray and Finch and Sloane's father. The room went deadly silent. Arthur Finch, the lead counsel who had been running the show, stood up so fast his chair tipped over. "Robert," Finch stammered, "I wasn't expecting you." "I am sure you weren't, Arthur," Robert Harrington said pleasantly. "But my daughter told me there was a closing today that required a steady hand. I decided to join the gallery." He looked at me. His eyes were sharp, intelligent, and unyielding. He nodded once, a gesture of peer-to-peer recognition. Sloane did not look at her father. She did not look at her colleagues. She looked at the back of the room, where Dylan was sitting. Dylan half rose from his chair, a desperate, hopeful smile plastering itself onto his face. He thought this was his lifeline. He thought Sloane had brought her father to save him. Sloane looked through him as if he were made of glass. She turned her back on him and walked to the table. She took her seat as second chair. Her movements were precise, mechanical, and utterly devoid of fear. "Ms. Harrington," I said. "Welcome back." "Thank you. Ms. Bailey," she replied. Her voice was clear. "Shall we proceed?" The meeting began. It was a symphony of legalese and finance. We moved through the agenda with ruthless efficiency. Mara Jennings read the clauses. Arthur Finch mumbled his agreements. The coastline executives signed the transfer documents one by one. We reached the final section, the closing conditions and warranties. "If there are no further objections," Arthur Finch said, eager to finish. We are ready for the principal signatures. I have an objection, Sloane said. The room froze. Finch looked at her like she had just pulled a grenade out of her briefcase. Sloane, Finch hissed. What are you doing? Sloane ignored him. She looked directly at me, then at the court stenographer who was recording the minutes. I would like to formally enter an addendum to the record regarding the Apex retail contract, Sloane said clearly. Specifically, the change of control provision located in the 2018 correspondence file. Marcus Thorne, the Coastline CEO, went pale. Finch looked like he was having a stroke. Ms. Harrington, Finch warned, this is privileged. It is material fact. Sloane cut him off. And I want the record to reflect that Strataforge Systems, specifically CEO Riley Bailey, identified this risk and negotiated a fair price adjustment of $40 million rather than voiding the deal. This action saved the merger and protected the shareholders of Coastline from a total collapse. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the room. I am placing this on the record, she continued, her voice ringing out, to confirm that this deal was conducted with absolute transparency and integrity by the buyer, despite significant attempts by the seller to obfuscate the asset value. It was a professional execution. She had just publicly saved me, destroyed her boss's attempt at deception, and cemented her own ethical standing in front of her father. Robert Harrington smiled. It was a small, proud smile. I looked at Sloane. Thank you, Ms. Harrington. The record will reflect your statement. I picked up the heavy fountain pen, the final signature. Well, a voice piped up from the back of the room. That is my sister for you. The silence shattered. Dylan was standing up. He couldn't help himself. The tension, the power, the proximity to the people he wanted to impress. It was too much for his narcissism to withstand. He had to be part of the scene. He walked past the security guard, who hesitated, looking at me for a command. She is a tough negotiator, Dylan said, putting on his best, charming salesman voice. He walked toward the table, buttoning his jacket. I always told her, you have to be ruthless. I remember when we were kids. I used to push her. I used to tell her, Riley, nobody is going to give it to you. You have to take it. I guess she finally listened to her big brother. He reached the end of the table. He placed a hand on the back of an empty chair, beaming at Robert Harrington, trying to make eye contact with the board members. I am just glad I could be the motivation she needed, Dylan said, chuckling. You know how it is. Sometimes you have to be the bad guy to help family grow. Tough love, right? The room was excruciatingly quiet. My board members were looking at him with a mixture of confusion and disgust. Marcus Thorne looked embarrassed to be breathing the same air. I placed the pen down. I did not sign the paper yet. I turned my chair slowly to face him. Motivation, I asked. Dylan's smile faltered slightly. Come on, you know what I mean. I pushed you. I made you want to prove yourself. You didn't push me, Dylan, I said. My voice was not loud, but in the acoustic perfection of the room, it hit him like a physical blow. You ignored me, you mocked me, and you erased me. I was helping you build character, Dylan insisted, glancing nervously at Sloane's father. Mr. Harrington, you understand. Family dynamics are complicated. I built this company in a studio apartment while you were telling your friends I was unemployed, so you wouldn't have to explain me, I said. I built this fortune while you were charging bottles to credit cards you couldn't pay. I bought our parents' mortgage while you were trying to leverage their equity to pay for a wedding you couldn't afford. Dylan flinched. Riley, stop. That is private. There is nothing private in a public company. Dylan, I said, and you are not the motivation for my success. You are the obstacle I had to climb over. You only realized I had a job the moment you needed me to write a check to save your reputation. Dylan opened his mouth to argue, to spin, to lie. But then Sloane stood up. The sound of her chair scraping back was final. She turned to face him. She didn't look angry. She looked tired. She looked like someone who had finally put down a heavy backpack she had been carrying for miles. Dylan, she said. Sloan, honey, Dylan started, sweating now. She is just emotional, the stress of the deal. Take off the ring, Sloan said. The words hung in the air. What? Dylan whispered. The ring, Sloan repeated. Take it off, and give it to me. I know you didn't buy it. I know you put it on a credit card that is currently 60 days past due. I checked the statement this morning. Dylan looked at her, his eyes wide with panic. Sloan, please, not here, not in front of your dad. Especially in front of my dad, Sloan said, because he is the one you were trying to marry. You didn't want me. Dylan, you wanted the Harrington name. You wanted the proximity to the partners. You wanted the safety net. She took a step closer to him. You don't love people, she said, her voice shaking slightly but gaining strength. You only love the reflection of yourself you see in their eyes, and I am done being your mirror. She held out her hand. Dylan looked around the room. He looked at the billionaires, the lawyers, the executives. He realized there was no audience left to charm. The lights were on, and everyone could see the cracks in the paint. With trembling hands, he slid the engagement ring off his finger. He had been wearing a matching band he insisted on buying. He placed it in Sloane's palm. He choked out. I just wanted to be enough. You were enough, Sloane said softly. Until you tried to be something you weren't. She closed her hand over the ring, then turned back to the table. She looked at me. I apologize for the interruption. Madame CEO, she said, please, sign your deal. The silence that followed was profound. My parents were not in the room, but I could feel the ghost of their expectations dissolving in the air. Dylan stood there, frozen, stripped of his fiancée, his dignity, and his narrative. I picked up the pen. I looked at the document. Strataforge Systems acquiring Coastline Freight Logic, $350 million. I signed my name, Riley Bailey. I handed the folder to Mara. Done, I said. The room erupted in polite, professional applause. It was the sound of business moving forward. I stood up. The applause died down. They were waiting for a speech. This was the moment for the thank yous, for the sentimental nods to family support. I looked at my team. I looked at Ruth, who had coded alongside me in the dark. I looked at Mara, who had fought for every inch of ground. I looked at Calvin, who had kept the world at bay. 6 years ago, I said, addressing the room, I wrote an algorithm on a laptop with a broken screen. I did not have a network. I did not have a legacy. I did not have a safety net. I glanced briefly at Dylan, who was now being gently guided toward the door by security. I learned that value is not created by what you say you are, I continued. It is created by what you actually deliver. We do not deal in stories here. We do not deal in appearances. At Strataforge, we build with truth and results. I raised my glass of water. To the work, I said. To the work. The room echoed. As the meeting dispersed and the champagne corks began to pop for the PR photos, I signaled to Calvin. Where is my father? I asked. He is in the waiting room on the 44th floor, Calvin said. He has been there since 8. Bring him to my office, I said. Alone. 10 minutes later, I walked into my private office. Tom Mercer was standing by the window, looking out at the same view that had shocked him days ago. He looked older. The events of the last 48 hours had aged him. He turned when I entered. He didn't smile. He looked ashamed. Riley, he said. Dad, I replied. I didn't offer him a seat. I stood in the center of the room. I saw Dylan downstairs, Tom said quietly. He was sitting on the curb. Security wouldn't let him back in the building. He told me the wedding is off. It is, I said. Tom nodded. He took a deep breath. And I know about the house. I know what you did. I checked the paperwork this morning. He looked at me, and his eyes filled with tears. I am sorry, he said. It wasn't a long speech. It wasn't flowery. But it was the first time in my life I had heard him say it without a but attached to it. I am sorry we didn't see you, he continued. I am sorry we treated you like something that needed to be fixed, instead of something that was already whole. We were so afraid you would fail that we forgot to look if you were succeeding. You weren't afraid I would fail. Dad, I said gently. You were afraid I wouldn't need you, and you were right. I didn't. Tom flinched, but he took it. He nodded. I can't undo it, he said. But I would like to know you, the real you, if you will let me. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had raised me, who had loved me imperfectly, who had made mistakes based on fear and pride. I didn't hate him, but I wasn't going to revert to being his little girl, either. You can know me, I said. But here is the condition. I walked over to the desk and leaned against it. You never ask me for money for Dylan, I said. You never ask me to give him a job. You never ask me to use my influence to fix his mistakes. If he falls, he falls. That is how he learns. Tom swallowed hard. Okay. And, I added, when you look at me, you don't look at a resource. You don't look at a retirement plan. You look at your daughter. If you can do that, we can have dinner on Sunday. If you can't, then the check for the mortgage will keep clearing. But I won't be there. Tom looked at me for a long, searching moment. He saw the steel in my spine. He saw the woman I had become. Sunday, he whispered. Sunday sounds good. He walked to the door. He paused, looking back. You look powerful. Riley. I am, I said. He left. I was alone in the office. The silence returned. But it wasn't heavy anymore. It was light. It was clean. I walked to the window. Down below, on the sidewalk, I could see a tiny figure walking away from the building. It was Dylan. He was walking alone. His shoulders hunched against the rain. There was no fiancée on his arm, no family entourage, no audience. Just him and the reality he had tried so hard to outrun. I watched him turn the corner and disappear. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel happy. I felt free. I turned away from the window. My laptop was pinging. Ruth had sent the integration schedule for the Coastline servers. There was work to do. I sat down at my desk. I opened the file. My name is Riley Bailey. I am 36 years old. I am the CEO of Strataforge Systems. And for the first time in my life, I don't have to apologize for any of it. I started typing. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It was a journey of vindication, truth, and the hard cost of success. I'd love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from your office, your car, or maybe while working on your own empire in the dark? Let me know in the comments below. Let's share our thoughts. Please subscribe to Maya Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach more people who need to hear that sometimes. The best revenge is just becoming exactly who you were meant to be. See you in the next story.